Bibliophiles of the internet, I'm Adri, and today I'm here to give you 5 reasons to read The Mirror Season by A.M. Macklemore. So funny story, I was actually supposed to be part of a book tour for The Mirror Season through Colored Pages Tours, which is a really wonderful blog that puts together book tours for upcoming books by marginalized authors. But the tour was actually postponed because of logistical reasons and pushed back to the week after I had top surgery, and obviously because of that I wasn't able to make my post as planned. And they were very gracious about it, but I finally got a chance to read the book and I thought this would be like an opportunity for a cute full circle moment. I should say this video is not affiliated with Colored Pages Tours, I just really appreciate the work they do, and it is because of them that I actually have a copy of this book, and it would be remiss of me not to acknowledge that. So their website and the master post for the Mirror Season book tour will be linked down below, and you should definitely check that out. With all that said, The Mirror Season is a queer contemporary magical realism story about a young pansexual Mexican-American girl named Graciela and a boy known as Locke who discovered that they were both sexually assaulted at the same party. Shortly afterwards, Ciela realizes that not only is she losing her gift of making magical pan dulce, but the neighborhood trees are also vanishing overnight, and the town is slowly being covered by a dangerous mirrored glass. When Locke reappears at Graciela's school, they begin to form a tenuous friendship, but Ciela becomes determined to protect him from the truth of that night and also from his heart being overtaken by the encroaching shards of glass. Content warnings for explorations of sexual assault and PTSD, bullying, harassment, and physical assault, homophobia, some depictions of vomit, and some consensual sexual content. First of all, I want to be very clear and say that this is not a blanket recommendation. It definitely comes with an asterisk because the story does heavily explore sexual assault and the trauma stemming from it. And even though the story doesn't explicitly describe the assault, there are times when it's recounted closely and it's also told in first person. So I trust you all to know yourselves and your capacities best, and you can decide whether you're in a place where you can engage with that kind of content. So with that in mind, reason number 1 to read The Mirror Season is because it's an inventive take on a fairy tale retelling, but not in the way that you might think. One of A.M. Macklemore's trademarks as an author is taking fairy tales, especially lesser-known fairy tales, and recentering them around queer Latinx characters with a magical realism twist. For example, just to name a few, Dark and Deepest Red is a reimagining of The Red Shoes, When the Moon Was Ours is a very loose reimagining of La Llorona, and Blanca y Roja is a reimagining of Swan Lake. The Mirror Season, on the other hand, takes very clear inspiration from the Snow Queen, but replaces the ice with this magical mirrored glass. And I think that really works within the context of the story because ice comes from nature, so to have something unnatural like glass be following Ciela wherever she goes and slowly growing all over town really emphasizes the emotional disruption stemming from Ciela's experience. The slow persistence of the glass growing and growing also mimics that feeling of being haunted by what happened, but also the fact that it's mirrors makes a lot of metaphorical sense. Mirrors can be beautiful, but when they're shattered, they can also become dangerous, and that glass also represents Graciela's fear of the truth because the purpose of a mirror is to reflect back a true likeness. So I love how the story is not a straightforward one-to-one retelling of the Snow Queen, but rather how it uses that fairy tale as a foundation upon which to build intricate metaphorical resonance. Reason number 2 is that the story presents a complex take on the idea of protecting your magic. One of the strongest magical realism elements in the story is this concept of magic relating to pan dulce. It's not really about making magical pan dulce, but rather Ciela has the ability to instantly read people and know what kind of pan dulce they would enjoy the most and would perhaps unlock something deep in their hearts. So actually it's a magical ability that's all about nurturing, giving, and connection, which is what makes it all the more striking when Ciela finds out that she can no longer do it. The loss of that connection is very profound because the magic comes from her family and history and culture. It's something that's so innately part of her, and she starts to believe that it was taken from her as punishment. There's a lot of internalized victim shaming that she has to work through over the course of the story, and grappling with the inconsistency of her magic is definitely part of that. She has to rid herself of the notion that she didn't do enough to protect herself and protect that part of herself, and realize that her worthiness and her value is not inherently and solely tied to her magic. The story challenges this idea that brown queer folks especially have to be worthy of good things or extraordinary things, that we have to earn the things that make us special or bring us happiness, when the truth is that we deserve them simply because we exist. And perhaps more importantly, that we don't have to protect the things about ourselves that that can never be taken away or lost in the first place. Reason number 3 is that this book is dark and challenging at times with good reason, but it also leaves so much space for softness. When you go into a story like this, you know there's going to be difficult moments, you know there's going to be pain and trauma, but I think the story does such a great job of subverting the idea that survivors are only ever destined for sadness. Within this story, there is so much warmth, beauty, magic, humor, and happiness to be found. There's a really tender, genuine friendship and possible romance blooming between Locke and Ciela as well that's really wonderful to witness. Yes, they both carry so much pain in their hearts, and they're both struggling to heal from what they've experienced, but they're still full of hopefulness and life, and they still have so much love to give to others and themselves. And I think it's important to see that what they've been through and what they're still discovering about themselves and with each other doesn't necessarily have to cancel each other out. The pain they're still navigating through doesn't have to undermine or negate their happiness, and they're not dishonoring what they've been through for wanting to hold on to those good moments. It's possible for pain to disrupt happiness and vice versa, and making space for those contradictions, those contrasting emotions, doesn't mean the story or the experience is untrue or less, but rather it shows that more than one complicated thing can be true at once. Survivors are so much more than just what they survived, and I appreciate that this story gives the characters depth and space to love, to be loved, and to grow. Reason number 4 is that this story profoundly understands that healing from trauma is not a straightforward process. I think we often romanticize or idealize or perhaps just oversimplify the process of healing to the point where there's this prevalent idea that healing is a clear-cut jump from point A to point B, when that's very rarely the case. There's also this idea that any kind of regression is a sign of failure when it's not, and when the truth is that there's so much more complexity in how healing is a constant state of negotiating and renegotiating where you are, how you feel, and what you need in any given circumstance. I appreciate that the story centers the fact that healing from trauma is rarely a linear process, that it's not as simple as feeling better with every day you put between yourself and what happened, but rather that what you need in order to feel safe might change from one day to the next. There are times when these characters want to forget, when they need to compartmentalize their feelings, when they need to focus on something else, when they need to actively avoid information or people or conversations just so that they can survive. And there's nothing wrong with that. We live in a deeply imperfect world, and sometimes we have to make imperfect choices in order to protect ourselves, and there is no shame in doing whatever it takes to keep ourselves safe, even if those choices seem quote-unquote counterproductive on the surface. And in a way, I think that ties into a bigger conversation about consent that goes beyond bodily consent. Because you can consent to having conversations, you can consent to taking on emotional labor, you can consent to learning information, or you can revoke that consent whenever you choose, and it's okay to choose not to engage in that moment. The characters are on a journey of healing, and that healing means navigating what they're prepared to confront and what they're not. But what's important is that they will eventually confront what they have to, but only when they're ready and only when it's on their terms. And finally, reason number 5 is that The Mirror Season is ultimately a powerful treatise on the reclamation of choice. Part of what is so traumatizing for these characters is reckoning with the fact that their ability to choose was taken away from them, and that it not only makes them feel powerless, but it changes how they understand themselves. But so much of the story is about how they're learning to create new relationships with those things that were weaponized against them in that very specific circumstance. Especially as Ciela and Locke explore this developing relationship with each other, they are creating a new context not only for things like sex, intimacy, and physical closeness, but also the intangible things like safety, emotional intimacy, joy, and trust. Even as they're uncovering the truth about that night and continuously unearthing that trauma in so many different ways, they're also reclaiming their own power and realizing that they get to decide how they feel and how they want to handle those situations. They get to decide if they want to make sex jokes or go on dates or steal trees or break school rules or trust people with their stories or do nothing at all. And all of those choices, trivial and otherwise, are valid choices. Confronting their trauma, choosing their magic, realizing that they're ready, and reaching out for support are all choices that they get to make. It's a difficult story, yes, but it's also a deeply powerful story about these characters rediscovering their agency, their power, their ability to heal, and their importance. Every survivor's experience with trauma is going to be different, and I don't think these characters are meant to represent everyone's story, but I do think they're written from a place of genuine vulnerability and hopefulness that makes their ability to choose for themselves deeply healing and cathartic. So those are just 5 reasons to read the Mirror season among so many, and even if you're not able to engage with this particular story, the good news is that A.M. Macklemore has a stellar backlist of books to choose from that I highly recommend. If you have also read the Mirror season, or if you plan to, feel free to drop your thoughts in the comments down below. But that's everything I had for this review and tentative recommendation today. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, educate yourself, be kind to yourself, take care of yourself, and I will catch you on the flip side of the page.